Good evening. It's a beautiful, amazing spring evening here on the homestead, and I'm very happy to announce that I have pollen for sale right now if people want to get apple pollen to pollinate their apple trees, to get seed to grow new varieties. And that's a whole story, but a lot of people who followed my channel already know about all that. If not, you can watch my apple breeding playlist, but I was gonna wait and send this pollen out this winter for pollinating next spring, but I decided since it's already ready, I might as well just put the stuff out there now, and some people may have a window still where they could get this, get this in the mail and get some pollinating done. I will be shipping this this week, Thursday, Friday, Monday, and then the following Thursday. But I'll have this stuff up for a couple of weeks. I may leave it up or I may take it down and then, relist whatever's left later. Now, if you can't pollinate now, you can still buy the stuff and then store it yourself, as long as it's real dry and you store it in the freezer. I'll send some instructions on that when I send the pollen out. So I got to get a lot more varieties this year. So there's a lot more variety, there's a lot more quantity, and I'm also happy to announce that I'm introducing Pollen Blends, which I'm calling Medleys. The regular apple medley is just a variety of varieties that I use for pollinating that I've already used in breeding or think are worth using in breeding. There's probably over 20 different apples in that, so that's pretty cool. And then the other one's just strictly red fleshed apples. It has pink parfait, rubaiyat, Christmas pink, grenadine, and then a few random red fleshed crab apples and stuff like that. It doesn't have maypole, but maypole is in the regular apple medley, and I do have maypole pollen packets. So this stuff's really fresh, and some of it isn't even dry yet, but I've been finding that it dries really nicely in the packets. I'm going to send them out, and when you get them, open them up and check them, and if they're not completely dry, like leave the packet overnight or something to finish drying. So what's cool about these packets? Well, there's a couple things. One is that you can just buy one packet and get this tremendous amount of genetic diversity. And it's good stuff. It's like stuff that I've hand selected out that I think is worth working with, basically. You sacrifice some control, but you also get the fact that when you rub this pollen on a flower like this, the flower has a bunch of girl parts, right? It doesn't just have one. So it's kind of like when your dog has puppies and they come out all different colors, right? You're definitely going to get different fathers in the same apple. So that means that, you get a bunch of different parents out of one pollination, and that's super cool. And again, you sacrifice some of the control that you have, but also it's just pretty cool to have this kind of wild card thing where you don't really know what you're going to get. It's kind of like gambling. And, you could pollinate even one apple and end up with a diverse genetic line that you could even back cross those, let alone if you do more than one apple. So I think this is just the best idea ever, and I could see this being a thing where there's, different medleys and or blends for different purposes, like an early blend, late hanging blend, long keeping blend, red flesh, high flavor, or apples with like novel flavors like anise and cherry and pineapple and stuff like that. So how cool is that? That's just such a cool idea, I think. So I've been real busy for just days here making pollinations. You can see these red tags right here. Well, these are all intentional pollinations. So I made a lot of different cross pollinations this year. I mean a lot, like I went nuts, and I actually was able to get done most of the crosses that I wrote down that I wanted to make, and then some. So look forward to a large quantity and very diverse array of intentionally pollinated apple seeds this fall, next winter, whenever I put them on sale. So I'm going to resist the temptation to go on kind of a sermon about apple genetic diversity, and especially the explosion of North American apple genetic diversity that happened when the apple was imported here, and why I think that happened, and how I think it happened, and why I think it's cool and important, and why we should make that happen again with a little bit more careful selection of varieties, but still a lot of varieties, and just like basically propagate an explosion of genetic diversity in apples again. Because a lot of the genetic diversity, thousands and thousands, maybe as many as like 15,000 I've heard, I think, named varieties of apples in North America, most of those are gone now. And we, could potentially rekindle that process, but with more focus and get more interesting results, I believe. So that wasn't me going on that rant, but we'll do that sometime. But let's go around and pollinate a couple blossoms. So I have already done this before. I've done videos on pollination, but I'm going to show you how I do it now. and just talk over a few talking points as I do it and show you what I'm doing with Wixen this year too. I've gone through some different phases with pollination and how I do it. At first I would do this. I would come in here, this one's open, the one I just picked off was open. So anything in the cluster, which I'm just doing this cluster right here, let's just get rid of this so it's not distracting us. Okay, we're just going to do this cluster here. So I pulled off the one that was open because it was already pollinated by bees probably. This one's just opening. It's probably not pollinated yet, but you never know, something might have got in there. And then I picked off the smallest ones after that. Now these two look the best, and this one probably is worth pollinating, but I'm not going to. So this is kind of what I'm after, is ones that are definitely going to open tomorrow. I take off the petals, and this can be a tricky operation. Like this variety is coming off super easy. Some of them just tend to tear and stick, and you have to work harder to get them off. The bees are just going to go straight to these, because this is like basically a crosshairs that says come and get me, I'm ready for open for business. Okay, now I used to take a small pair of scissors and take off all these little yellow ball things right here, and those are the anthers, or the male parts, and they produce pollen. But in most cases, the apple's not going to pollinate itself that way. So one thing people will do in breeding programs quite a bit is they'll just pick a whole branch or even a whole tree and just net the whole thing. And then once a day, take the net off, go in there and apply pollen. But they don't even take the petals off or anything. They just leave the flowers. So new flowers open every day. They go in there and add the pollen. So that's essentially what I'm doing, except I'm taking away the bee's incentive to get to the flower by taking the petals off. So now I just leave these things on because it's just so much easier. And yeah, it's possible that we could get some accidental pollinations that way, but you know, it's way less work, because when you get in here with these tiny scissors and you're trying to clip off those little things, you can look at my old videos on that. It's really a lot of work. So that's all I have to do to prep this. Now I'm going to open my little pollen packet, and hopefully you can kind of see in here. And there's the pollen spread all inside this black paper. It's like real easy to see in there. I'm just going to rub my Q-tip on that surface. I need very little. Can you see that? And then, I mean, the amount of pollen in this packet, which if you're careful with it, will pollinate a tremendous amount of flowers. And then I'm just going to touch this on here. Now the other thing that could potentially happen is if these little anthers are already releasing pollen, you could contaminate your applicator with pollen from this variety, and then when you take this to do something else, you know, transfer that. But in most cases, if you're in that balloon stage, almost all the time, but occasionally there's exceptions, these are not releasing any pollen yet. They're still fresh, they're completely closed, and the pollen's in there waiting to come out, but they have to open up and dry first. So I don't worry about that too much either. And that's it. If you want to be real sure, like you only have a couple of blossoms or something like that, you can come back and do that again the next day. Again, it's better to do it in late morning. So obviously the other thing is we need to tag this. Now there's one more method that you can use. This is what Nigel Deacon has done in the past. I don't know if he still does it or not, but there's a special little pair of scissors with a notch cut in it. You can actually make them yourself. And then you clip just below this green part, this little calyx thing here. And you actually cut that off, and it takes the male parts with it when you do it. When I tried that, I had a really poor success rate. I also had a poor success rate when I took a comb and I just combed off the male parts over the top of the female parts, which are in the center here. They're like 5 little stalks in the middle. You probably can't see them. When I did that, that was the worst year pollinating I ever had, and so I just went to this method. But there's other things you can do too, like if you really, really want to make sure that no bee is going to accidentally land on this and crawl over it or something like that and pollinate it, you can take off the anthers and all that stuff and then bag this when you're done, you know, if you want. But this is how I do it now. Yesterday, I went through this branch and I took off every flower that was already open. And then I put this net on it. So basically now I have a situation where I have a bunch of open blossoms that need pollinating, which I should have done this morning, but I wanted to make this video. And I'm just going to go in here. No bugs have gotten in here. And I'm not going to open any blossoms because they're already open. And I'm just going to go with this mixture of apple pollen and hit these guys. And I could come in here tomorrow with a different pollen blend and do this again. There's a lot of pollen on this Q-tip here, It doesn't take much, so just a little rub around the center of the flower, and I can of course do this again, tomorrow to the same flowers. Just anything that's open, I'll just rub pollen on it again. Every time I rub this pollen mixture on a new blossom, I'm not just pollinating that blossom with one variety. This branch is going to be pollinated with like 20 different varieties of apples with one parent, which is an awesome parent. It's Wixen. So, I kind of have this idea that we should just all be growing Wixen seeds, and there's a few left, by the way, in the web store if anyone wants to buy some, that are just randomly pollinated by bees. What if I netted this entire tree in 1 year and then came out every morning and did this and had an entire tree full of intentionally cross-pollinated apples with like, say, 30, 40, 50 different varieties of apples? How cool would that be? It's like a treasure chest, genetic treasure chest, to grow those out, except that it takes, 5 to 10 years to open the lock. Oh yeah, this branch needs to smoke a cigarette now. Here we have the cordon rose too. It's going to be a good apple year. So one cross I made quite a bit of this year was pink parfait with Appaloosa. I can name this apple Appaloosa because it has spots like an Appaloosa horse. It's a grenadine offspring. By the way, I have mixed feelings about that name. It's like super gimmicky, but it's kind of funny. It was just sort of a joke, but it might end up sticking. It's grenadine crossed with Lady Williams. So this is like, I'm getting into the second generation crosses now. And the reason this is exciting is because all of these apples hang late. Grenadine, Lady Williams, and pink parfait all hang late. Over here on the tree, there are still Lady Williams apples on the tree with the blossoms right now. So that's really cool. Plus I have, 2 apples with red flesh, the pink parfait and the grenadine, well, Appaloosa now. So the only downside to this cross is all 3 of those get scab really bad. But seriously, just, the number of different crosses I made here is just insane. Like all over different kinds of trees, like Gold Rush. I made a lot on Sweet 16. I use this Appaloosa pollen quite a bit. I hope people get excited about that this next coming year, because I'm going to have an awful lot of seeds and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them otherwise.